All right, everyone. This was quite popular when I posted this painting, so I was going to go ahead and do a tutorial for you guys. This one is super duper easy, and I think you're going to really have a lot of fun with it. To get started, of course, you're going to want your water and a rag. The colors I have here are Mars Black, Titanium White. This is Quinacridone Crimson. If you don't have that, you could easily use quinacridone magenta or even this cadmium red, which I'll be using for some accents here. And this is cadmium yellow. You can also use a Hansa yellow, but the cadmium is more opaque. And then one thing I forgot to add to my palette, which I will do now, is Phthalo Green. Sometimes when you're in the store, you will see it called phthalocyanine. It's the same thing. It's phthalo green. Okay, as for brushes, you're going to want a flat brush or a wash brush, whichever you want to use. When I taught this live, we used the little thin, tiny cheapo flat brush for pretty much everything except for the rounded areas. And for the rounded areas, it was just the small detail round brush, which you could use this. If you really like the liner brushes, you can use those when we get to the grasses. It's really whatever makes you more comfortable. I'll try to use a couple different brushes so you can see what it's going to look like as we go through. Okay, so a little bit about the background here. We are doing what is called a wet on wet technique. It's going to give you a lot of texture, excuse me, to give you that really textured background. Depending on how thick you put your paint on the canvas, you may end up even with some ridges, which I really love how it kind of gives it some dimension. Okay, so you're really going to load up your brush. This is any flat brush or wash brush that you have. Just keep in mind, the larger the canvas, the bigger the brush you're going to want to use. And I'm just coming in here, just random strokes. It's not quite as important when you're working with a single color, but as we add the white into the mix, you're really going to want to do some random strokes to get that lovely textured background. Now I'm just doing with straight black here in the corners, and you can come down the sides some. If you are using a stretched canvas that's on stretcher bars, you know, your typical canvas you'll find in the store, unlike the canvas sheet that I'm using, you may want to paint your sides as you go along. Because of the texture, you may want to pick either a black or a white or just straight gray, so you're not worrying about the texture going around, you know, perfectly. But it is up to you. Okay, so now without cleaning my brush, I'm going to add some white. And I'm just going to come in here, again, just with random strokes. Okay. If you want to use the smaller brush, I'll show you what that will look like here. This will give you more, I guess, crisp lines because this is a stiffer brush. So if you want to go that route, feel free to do so. But I'm going to stick with my big brush here. Now, if this is too dark for you, by all means, add more white into the mix. Now you see, because the paint is still wet, you're getting some nice mixing and some gray tones. This is going to use quite a bit of white paint, so just be prepared. I think I'm going to have to add more to my palette, as is per usual with me. I either put too much or not enough on my palette. So let me grab a bit more here. Okay. And hopefully that's enough this time. And you're just going to continue this process until you fill the entire canvas. This is not about perfection. This is an abstract, really fun painting. And I don't know if you can see it here in the camera, but I do have some nice globs here. I've got a nice glob there and here. That's going to add some nice texture. And even when you go to paint the poppies over it, it's still going to look really nice and add that bit of texture and add to the abstract nature of this piece. All right, and of course I just smushed one of my blobbies, but that's okay. I still like how this is turning out. Okay, so I'm going to rinse my brush and I'm going to dry this. I may end up using a bit of my heat gun here to let this dry a bit faster. This, because it is thick and it is wet on wet, it may take quite a while to dry. So I'm going to pause the video and we'll start back up once it's dry. Oh my God. Okay, so now I'm going to add a little bit of flair to the background here. I'm trying to get most of the paint off my brush because I don't want to dim this too much, and I'm going to make a tiny bit of an orange color here. So for this I'm using the cadmium red and the cadmium yellow, and then I'm going to add some white to this to cool it down quite a bit. So what this part of the process is going to do is it's going to make it look like there are some of the poppies in the background. So you can do as many or as few of these as you like. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And if you get it too dark, you can come back over if you want and lighten it with a bit of white. And you see I still had some gray on my brush, and I like how that looks because it's just kind of blending it a bit more. If you don't like that streakiness, then by all means go ahead and rinse your brush a bit better. Now some of these got a bit too intense for my liking, so I'm just going back over with a bit more white and gray here. Alternatively, before you allow the background to dry, you can add the poppies, the orange color in there, and it'll give you an even more muted look. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do now is work on the grasses, and I'm going to come in with straight green. I'm going to show you what this is going to look like first. If your paint is gloppy, a lot of times when you use your liner brushes, it's a little hard to work with. So just like in our line work video from, I think it was last week or recently, whatever, you want your paint to be a little bit of a thinner consistency. So we're just going to come in and just do random lines of grass. You can do varying heights, varying lengths, widths, whatever. Okay, so that's what it looks like with a line brush, a long line brush. Here's a bit of a thinner line brush. Just make sure you get a good amount of paint on your brush, no matter what type of brush you're using. And you see, again, this is very random. I know a lot of people don't like the randomness, but that's how you get it to look a bit more natural, even though this is an abstract. Okay, now if you want to use a bigger brush, here is a round brush that I have, and you see it does the same thing, just a little bit wider. You can also come in with a flat brush if you don't have any detail brushes, and hold it vertically so just the tips of the bristles hit the canvas. And you'll notice this green is pretty transparent. That's okay. We're going to be going back over it with another color. This is just to kind of add that pop of green. I'm just coming in here, just filling in here and there. And I do really want to focus on having a couple longer stems, because that's where our poppy flowers are going to be. And don't worry too much if there's any spotting in the color, because like I said, we will be going back over. And for these longer stems, you can hear my house phone here. Okay. So anyway, you'll want to make room or make longer stems for your poppies, and we'll go back over that with black to really define it. But otherwise, the rest can just be varying lengths. This doesn't have to be perfect. It's just kind of filling in the space on the bottom. And just reload your paint as needed. I'm going to come in and do a few more tall ones here before I switch over to my black. Okay, without washing my brush, I'm just coming over here, getting a nice coating of black on here. For this, you don't need to really add the liquid unless you want to thin it out so you don't get as many of the bumpy texture from the canvas. Up to you. Now you don't want to cover all the green, just some of it. This just adds, I guess, a tiny bit of depth and also a bit of that abstract whimsy, if you will. The only time I'm being careful is when I'm going over some of the longer ones, just because I don't want it to cover the green completely, but I want to make sure it's going in the same direction and following the same path. And the rest you can just be really random with. And I think personally I am going to switch to a flat brush here in just a minute, just to kind of get some thicker strokes and fill in some. But if you'd prefer to stick with your detail brush, by all means, stick with that. So this is not a fancy flat brush at all. It's just a cheap little craft brush that I had. I just really like the bristles on it. It's nice. It's soft, but not too soft. So I can really add some pressure without them splaying out all over the place. If you watched the beginner video that I did, you'll know I'm not big on brand name brushes. I'm all about the feel and how it works for you. Some of my favorite brushes are really bargain brushes that I got dirt cheap, or were hand-me-downs, or were from a random set I found on Amazon. So I recommend that brand, Santa Fe, but it's not the end-all be-all. You do what makes you comfortable and what makes you happy and just feels good for you. Okay, I think I'm gonna come back in with a little more green because it looks like I may have covered up more than I wanted to. And I'll still use my flat brush here just to keep it consistent. And I'm just adding a few in here. All right. So now I am going to come in with a round brush. We're going to start off by doing a few little buds. And if you are familiar with poppies, the buds look like pods almost. So this is basically just an egg shape that you're going to draw here. So I'm going to do maybe one in here lower. It's just kind of, like I said, kind of an egg shape. That was really wet there, so I'm just putting it on a bit thicker. Okay, and then I'll come over here, and again, almost like an egg shape. And if your stem seems too thin for what you have, you can kind of run your brush down a bit more. Oops. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Again, this is abstract. Okay, you can do as many of the pods as you want. I'm just going to leave it with 2. And I'm coming in, rinsing my brush a bit. And again, kind of with this wet on wet theory, I'm coming in with a little bit of the green mixed with a touch of white here. It doesn't have to be mixed perfectly. And I'm going to decide where I want my light source to be. So I guess my light source is going to be up here. So I'm going to come over here and just do a tiny highlight. And it, again, does not have to be perfect at all. Just kind of getting it. And since it is wet, it's going to blend in, which is a-okay. This is just to kind of give it a tiny bit of dimension there. All right. So now we're moving on to the actual poppies. Now I will be using quinacridone crimson for mine. Feel free to use the cadmium red if that's all you have. This brush is a little stiff, so I'm going to give it a little bit of a bath in the water real quick. And all I'm going to do is just load my brush here. Now again, these are abstract, so they're not going to look perfect, like perfect poppies. So what I'm doing is I'm going to take my brush and just push it flat. And push it flat. So now you have like a V. And then do a third one coming down the middle there. Okay, you can kind of clean up any mess ups or anything. And we will be layering, so there's no need to worry about any blips or anything, or any see-through parts, because we will, like I said, be layering and go over it. So here, this is this brush has a bit of a rounded tip, so you can either do it this way, or if you go up this way, it will be a bit flatter at the top. Whatever your preference is. And there's one of my textured areas of paint that did not fully dry, and that's okay. So I'm cleaning my brush a bit. Now there are two options here. You can use your orange to do these little highlights that I'm about to show you, or you can make like a pinkish color, or really just dip in a little bit of white. So I'll show you both here. And dip in a little bit of white, and while this is still wet, holding the brush vertically, I'm just going to come down on each petal like this, and you see it's dragging the color. The only time I'm being very specific about it is with this petal here, because with Poppies, this petal sticks out a bit more. Okay, so again with the white, and I will show you how to shade this in just a minute so that it really stands out. All right, now with this last one, I will do the orange for you. Same kind of brush strokes, just orange instead. So here I would take a round brush or a liner brush or something. And I'm going to take a little bit of the red. I need some of my glazing medium here. And just a hair of black. This is going to make a really ugly, muddy red color. Had a bit too much water on my brush. And I'm just coming through here and just along the edges of that petal, the one that you want to stand out, and just coming in with that dark color. And now whatever color you use to do the texture on the petal, whether it's plain white or your orange, just come back on that one petal. You can do all of them actually, if that's going to help. And you see, just adding that little tiny bit of that dark red under there really makes it pop. Let me get my orange here, and I'm going to add a touch more white just because it was a bit too intense for my liking. And it just really kind of makes it stand out a bit more. Like that petal is really, really in front. If you don't like how intense the white is, by all means, dip in your red again and go back over a bit. And that'll add even more texture to your flower. Now with a liner brush or small round brush again, we're just going to add the final accents, which is just where the, oops, had too much water on my brush. Okay, where the final accent is, you're just going to come, oh sorry, where the flower attaches to the stem, sorry, blah, blah, blah. Mush mouth today. Okay, you're just going to add these little lines to kind of show where the flower connects to the stem. Again, does not have to be perfect at all. And then your last step is to sign your name. When you're signing your name, it's best to have your paint like an inky consistency. And I think I'll go over here this time. And there you have a quick and lovely abstract poppy painting.